I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And here we are with a bonus episode here on Thursday, talking about the best cinematography category. Yes, we have videos every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, but decided to do an extra video this week talking about the best cinematography category because I want to do a deep dive into this one because it's been a very weird couple of years with the cinematography category. If you remember back in 2022 for the 2023 Oscars, it was a really weird year. I think none of my 5 that I predicted back in November of that year ended up getting nominated. Very rarely happens, and last year we got things back on track where my video in November I predicted 4 out of the 5 already, but it just gives us that reconfirmation that you never know Oscar categories fully, that they can surprise you and come out of nowhere. So that's why we make these videos and talk about the 5 that I'm predicting, but also some possible contenders so that you're on top of what the potential nominees could be. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week and sometimes multiple times a week is discuss different Oscar categories, what I'm predicting, some possible contenders, and just to ultimately help you with your own predictions. I also love to hear your predictions in the comments down below. So if you have predictions for something like Best Cinematography, please feel free to share them down below and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss a video, particularly when you have them, yes, on Mondays at 12 p.m. Eastern, but also on these kind of sporadic ones, usually on Thursdays as well. Once we get further along into the season, we're going to be talking about my predictions for Golden Globe nominations or my predictions for the Critics' Choice Awards or the Oscars eventually. You know, they're a little bit more, not necessarily on Mondays. They can be only a few days before the events, just so that I have as much time and to do analysis and what have you. But been really enjoying this series and this year so far. I think it's going to be a really exciting Oscar race, and this category in particular is a fun one, so I wanted to do a separate video for it to really do a deep dive and not kind of squish it with another video and not give it the attention that it deserves, because it is such an unpredictable category. So hopefully I'm doing better this year than I did in 2022, maybe more of like a 2023 year, where I got 4 of the 5 correct. But without further ado, let's jump into things, starting off with my first prediction, which is going to go to The Brutalist. This is a movie that I have had the pleasure of seeing back in TIFF. It was projected in 70mm, great experience, and I think the kind of focus and marketing and discussion about the movie, so much of it has to do with it being shot on 70mm. And I think the cinematographer's branch of the Academy will definitely appreciate that. They've been, more likely to nominate movies shot on film or shot in black and white, different styles. They're not necessarily, we only care about digital cameras and we don't care about film. They're kind of, gear junkies. They like the fact that, I'm was probably jealous that someone like Lowell Crawley was able to shoot this entire movie on 70mm. And not like IMAX 70mm like Hoyte has done for the Nolan movies, but actual proper old school VistaVision 70mm. And I think that also, the fact that they shot this on film will make people want to nominate this movie because it's such a unique experience. They did something that was unique and different with their visuals. And then also the way the camera actually influenced the visuals. You can see in the movie that sometimes the camera is slightly tilted, and that's just because of a practical reason, because the canisters were so big that when you were taking the used film into the unused film and it reeled through the camera to the unused side, it actually caused the camera to tilt a little bit because the cameras were so big and so heavy, and the 70mm film was so thick. So there is kind of an added marketing aspect to that as well, where it's like the camera that they used influenced and inspired some of the choices in the shots of the movie. And then the movie itself, I think it's going to get nominated for Best Picture. I think it could be a potential Best Picture winner even. And it's got really beautiful painterly long takes and aesthetics and beautiful shots. The visuals are the focus of this movie. Like I said in the past, some movies like Anora, I'd say, are a little bit more screenplay focused. If you know, like a Noah Baumbach movie, that's a screenplay focused movie. But then a movie like Dune 2 or The Brutalist, these are movies, or Nolan's movies. They're movies where the visuals are more important sometimes than even the story. And The Brutalist, I think, is more so a visual movie than it is a screenplay movie. And as a result, it should get appreciated here in cinematography. Then my second prediction, I'm going to go with Dune Part 2. And I'm pretty confident this gets nominated, but with a slight reservation, which I'll discuss later. First off, I want to say that, this is shot by Greg Fraser, who won for the first Dune movie. And this movie in the press as well, and what Denis was saying, the script, the screenplay doesn't really matter. It's about the visuals. It's about the cinema. And I think this movie elevates everything that the first movie did so well, but more silhouettes, more abstract, use of color and orange and things like that. And you have the whole kind of black and white sequence in the movie, which is so visually different and interesting as compared to the rest of the movie. It's just a movie that was shown in IMAX, which was a big screen theater movie that had that kind of epic scale of a Lawrence of Arabia or some of the kind of old school big time movie screen type movies, like a Christopher Nolan movie as well. And I think the cinematographer's branch will appreciate kind of what Greg Fraser was able to do, as well as combining the intense visual effects of this movie to still feel realistic and like grounded, and how they were able to kind of light everything that way and keep that visual tone. Greg Fraser is a well-liked cinematographer. Of course, he won for the first Dune, but was also nominated in 2016 for Lion. So he's a past nominee. He's in a Best Picture likely movie, I think, in Dune Part 2. And the movie will get nominated on the back of these types of nominations. It is the Dunkirk of this year. Probably no acting nominations, but a lot of technical stuff. Or the 1917 of this year. You usually see these movies. Avatar: The Way of Water. Lots of technical nominations. Maybe director get in for picture as well. And I think cinematography, because it's a movie that's so focused on visuals, makes sense. Now, the one reservation I had, though, was that we often compare this movie and this kind of maybe trilogy of movies to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, in that series, the first one, Fellowship of the Ring, got some Oscars. The second one didn't really, only got a couple. And then the final one got all of the Oscars. And if they're waiting to do that for Dune to wrap up its story with 3, then if by that logic, Dune 2 actually won't get nominated in this category at all, because if you remember in 2001, The Fellowship of the Ring won for Best Cinematography, just like the first Dune movie did, and then Andrew Lesnie didn't even get nominated for Two Towers or Return of the King. And I think the thinking there was like, you've established the visual language in the first movie, you've done it already, now it's just a continuation of the story, there's not something as impressive. And we do see that sometimes with sequels, so I'm wondering, there could be a situation here where they gave it to him for the first Dune, and Dune 2 is, you could say it's more of the same. You already established the visual language of the franchise, you're just continuing that. I wouldn't say that. I think he definitely elevates it, and there's great sequences like the black and white sequence, which are completely different than the first movie, but there could be an argument there where we already gave you the Oscar, we're not going to reward you again for the same franchise, we're going to give it to someone else. It's a possibility, but I think that because it's such a strong Best Picture nominee, and because its visuals and its technical craft is so fantastic, there could even be a chance here with Greg Fraser that he wins again, but it is something to kind of keep an eye out. It's in my number 2, but it's not necessarily like a locked and loaded number 2. It could be a potential winner, but it also could be not nominated. Then my third prediction, I'm going to go with Maria, which may be an odd choice to some people, but on paper, if you do the research, there is a lot of things going for it. I looked at its odds on Gold Derby, and I was actually surprised that it wasn't even in the top 5, because for me, it's a pretty solid 3. Although I do understand why not a lot of people have seen the movie. It's not a Best Picture contender. It has to have really great cinematography to get nominated, right? Well, thankfully it is. It is a fantastically photographed film, but that's not necessarily the reason why I'm predicting it. I'm predicting it for 2 reasons. 1, because the Academy loves past nominees, and 2, because the Academy really only cares about the quality of the image, not the quality of the movie for this category. So let me break that down. So the first thing, this category, for the most part, likes people who have been nominated in the past before. I looked at the past 5 years, and there's an average of 3 out of the 5 nominees every year for the cinematography category that have already been nominated before. They're past nominees or past winners. They like to nominate a lot of the same people over and over again. Not every year, right? But for the most part, 3 out of 5. The majority of them are past nominees. Well, that helps Ed Lachman. Ed Lachman, for example, even last year got nominated for El Conde, a Netflix movie that wasn't really well celebrated, that wasn't well seen, that wasn't an Oscar conversation, but they loved his photography. They saw it, they like him, they nominated him. So I think there's a benefit there of a past nominee. And then the second point is that they don't care about the quality of the movie, they care about the quality of the image, which is why this category will nominate movies that aren't the most critically well acclaimed, like Bardo or Empire of Light, or even El Conde or Never Look Away. The smaller movies that don't get any other nominations except for cinematography, they're much more willing to go out on their own and go, hey, if it's well shot, we'll appreciate that. And oftentimes those people, Never Look Away, Caleb Deschanel, Empire of Light, Roger Deakins, Alconda, Ed Lachman, these are well-established cinematographers who maybe do some great work in a lesser movie. Well, they still get nominated. And what's the case this year? Maria is kind of that movie. It's a movie that played at festivals, probably will get in for Angelina Jolie, but probably nothing else. Maybe something like a costumes or cinematography here. But it's not a big Oscar movie. It was kind of mediocrely received ultimately. Well, that's a classic kind of example that the Academy will appreciate. And it fits that mold very well. And then also, one thing to keep in mind is that Netflix movies have done very well in this category. 3 out of the last 6 winners, Roma, All Quiet on the Western Front, and Mank, were Netflix movies. So I think they've done a great job campaigning in this category and making sure that this branch sees their movies actually in a movie theater, not on Netflix, so that they're not weird and compressed or anything like that. So there's actually a great amount of appreciation for Netflix movies, just in general in this category. So Maria, a middling reviewed Netflix movie by an established cinematographer with some great cinematography. And it almost helps that it's a movie that's not as well liked. Got a bunch of things going for it. So I think Maria really has a strong chance at getting nominated with, who knows, maybe even the potential to win. Then in my 4th slot, I went with Conclave. And this was a movie that, when I initially had my predictions, I didn't even have in as a possible contender. But the more I did research, the more I did kind of considerations, I thought that this has a solid chance. It's not a lock in the 4th slot. It's absolutely almost kind of a mini possible contender. You can easily swap this movie out. But I'll tell you why I ultimately did go with this movie. And that's because of its connection to Best Production Design. We talked about the connection between past nominees in this category, but also there's a strong connection between this category and the Best Production Design category. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If you have a really well-designed movie, well, then the cinematographer just has to, put the camera on the really beautiful sets and it makes it look nice. In the same way, you can have a low-budget movie like the original Alien, which has a kind of rinky-dink set to low-budget set, but it looks amazing because of how it was lit, how it was framed, the cinematography. So there's a kind of symbiotic relationship there between those two categories. So much so that I went back over the past 5 years, and similarly with the past nominee stat, there are an average of 3 out of 5 overlap between production design nominees and cinematography nominees. So what does that tell us? It tells us that if you have, only one movie overlapping between the cinematography category and the production design category, one of those two categories are probably wrong. There is frequently an overlap. So make your production design picks, line them up with your cinematography picks, and go, okay, where's the overlap? For me, Brutalist, there's an overlap there. I think we'll get in for both categories. Dune Part 2, I think we'll get in for both categories. And then Conclave, I think we'll get in for both categories. Now, you may not have Conclave in for production design. That's not a guarantee, but I do. So because I have that connection there, that's a benefit. I also think this movie is a likely Best Picture nominee. That always helps too. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then I think just, its visual locations, that it has that kind of iconic Vatican location, very kind of glossy cinematography, very interested on inserts. I think it is a very well shot movie. Even if it isn't the most flashy, I think there's going to be an appreciation of almost the design, how it was shot in conjunction with the costumes, in conjunction with the production design. I think that Conclave is a real contender because of that connection to production design, because of that connection to Best Picture, and because of its kind of glossy, interesting, high-angle, unique angle cinematography. And let's not forget, Edward Berger's last movie, All Quiet on the Western Front, won in this category. So there's an appreciation kind of for his eye and visual style. Then in my final slot, I went with Nickel Boys. And I went with this because we've talked about the connection with this category with past nominees. We talked about this category's connection with production design, but actually the strongest connection in this category with any other category is Best Picture. There's an average of 3.75 out of the 5 nominees every year in Best Cinematography that also get nominated for Best Picture. And actually, if you remove the weird year, 2022, and just look at every other year, the 4 years of the past 5 years, there's an exact, every single year, 4 out of the 5 nominees in cinematography that get nominated for Best Picture. So they'll always have one weird one, like an Alconda, like a Lighthouse, like a Never Look Away. But for the most part, 4 out of the 5 are Best Picture nominees. So when you're looking at your lineup, I think Brutalist is getting in. I think Dune Part 2 is getting in. I don't think Maria is getting in. I think Conclave is getting in. And I think Nickel Boys is getting in. And that was a big factor for me because this is from Jomo Frey. He's not a past nominee. The movie I don't think is going to get nominated for Best Production Design. But I do think it's going to get in for Best Picture. So then you may go, Connor, okay, well, why'd you choose Nickel Boys and not another more likely Best Picture movie like Amelia Perez or Wicked, which also will probably get in for Best Production Design? All great questions. But of course, if you see Nickel Boys, you know exactly why. And quick, slight spoilers for the form of the movie. Skip ahead 10 seconds if you want to know absolutely nothing about Nickel Boys. The movie is shot in the first person. So, of course, that's why I went with this movie. It's so visually interesting. When you think about the movie, you think about the camera operator and how they shot things, and that very intimate person looking directly at the camera. So much of the emotion of the movie, in particular with someone like Ingenue Ellis-Taylor's performance, comes from us almost being the cinematographer in the movie. The visuals are the highlight of this movie. And even though it's not a past nominee, even though it's not a production design nomination, 4 out of the last 5 years, pretty much every single year, it's not 5 out of 5, it's not 3, it's 4 out of 5 get nominated for Best Picture. Right now, I could have gone with one of my other possible contenders, but I wanted to make sure that I had a Best Picture movie nominated here, and a Best Picture movie that I think is a real Best Picture contender in terms of a nomination. Now talking about some possible contenders, which are very much strong possible contenders. My first one being Nosferatu. I left this ultimately in the possible contenders section because I looked at it and I went, okay, you have a past nominee, Jaron Blaschke, which is great. You have a potential production design nomination, which is great. You don't have that connection with Best Picture. So I could easily replace this movie with something like Conclave. But right now, because I have Conclave in my production design nominations, the way I thought about it was Conclave is getting production design and picture. Nosferatu is getting production design and has a past nominee. So of those two stats, I bet on Best Picture and production design connection. But if Conclave doesn't get nominated for production design, I may switch that out with something like Nosferatu. Now it's not getting nominated for Best Picture, but I think we'll have a stronger shot at production design and as a past nominee, so still has things going for it. We also haven't discussed that this branch really loves black and white movies, and while the movie is not shot in black and white, there are these very kind of cold, bluish gray scenes that are like almost black and white. They're kind of borderline black and white, particularly many of the night scenes of this movie. Haven't seen the movie, but based on the trailer. So I think there's going to be an appreciation for that there. And Jaron Blaschke is a past nominee, and if you've seen Egger's movies, you know the visuals are so important to them as well. So if it is, potential Oscar movie that gets in for costume design and makeup and production design, it could also sneak in here for cinematography. But I don't think it's a Best Picture contender. I think the movie will probably be too weird for the mainstream Academy, and that may hurt it in terms of its chances here, because like we said, 4 of the 5 nominees most year go to Best Picture nominees, and if Nosferatu doesn't have a chance, that will hurt ultimately its prospects. And then in my final possible contender slot here, I want to talk about Gladiator II. It's a contender. It's not maybe a strong one, but absolutely a contender because it's a past nominee in John Matheson. It's from a movie that could get nominated for Best Picture. It's a movie that I think will definitely get nominated for Best Production Design after having seen the movie. And then I also think that, the reason why I had it out ultimately is because it's more like a movie like Avatar: The Way of Water, or even if it gets in for picture and production design, it's a sequel to a long-awaited movie from a past nominated cinematographer, yes, but maybe not as visually interesting as when the first movie came out. It's more of the same. The visual language was established back in the 2000s, and now in the 2020s, it's more of the same, and that's not necessarily the main focus of the movie. Also could be similar to the movie like Napoleon from last year. Ridley Scott's movies haven't gotten nominated in cinematography for a little bit, just because that kind of a washed out, desaturated look that makes a Ridley Scott movie isn't always the most appreciated by the modern day branch of the Academy. They kind of feel like they've seen that, done that, they've kind of done that before. So there's a little bit of a knock against, I think, the Ridley Scott visual look, unfortunately. But still, absolutely a possible contender because it's a likely production design nomination from a past nominee that could also get nominated for Best Picture as well. So if there's a bit of momentum, does really well at the box office, what have you, they could see this potentially in this category as well. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your predictions for Best Cinematography. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.